Could it be possible that we finally reached a point in time that we no longer refer to vehicles as crossovers, but rather small sport utilities? Well, potentially, because, well, the line is so blurred, I can't tell the difference. Hey, welcome to this edition of Road Warrior. I'm your host, Grant Roberson. Now, this week is the all-new 2019 Cadillac XT4. And what I find is, well, I thought this was a crossover, but, well, Cadillac calls it a small sport ute. Now, admittedly, I take a layman's approach when it comes to defining vehicles. When you look at like big SUVs, well, that's a no-brainer. Look at sedans, pretty obvious. Even a truck, I can define that vehicle. But when it comes to crossovers and small sport utilities, well, I flip the quarter of the difference between the two, because when you're looking at XT4, truly, how do you define it? Now, what Cadillac states is, well, it's built on an SUV-like platform. That versus crossovers, I guess you could argue, is more sedan-like. But at the end of the day, for this kind of layman's approach, I look at the outside and see the overall scale, the kind of fit and trim, and pretty much the drivability behind the wheel. And I say, well, take your pick. Does it feel like an SUV? Does it feel like a crossover? In the day, it's got great drivability. So referring to this as a small sport utility, let's look at the overall numbers, because, well, scale does matter when you get into the SUV world. Where does it fit in? Now, certainly it's not in mid-size, on the smaller, but don't call it compact, because it definitely delivers both interior comfort when it comes to room enough for 5 and some cargo to boot. Now, overall numbers, what you're going to find is around about 181 inches, wheelbase fairly stretched at about 109. As for width, fairly narrow, but with the mirrors around about 83 inches. But height is a crucial point, because SUVs start to creep up and make you feel a little tight in the, well, proverbial parking decks. But what you're going to see here is around about 64 inches, which basically makes it, again, feel quite maneuverable when you scale it down vertically, because it just helps the timid driver get in with ease. So with size out of the way, definition definitely figured out, let's talk about design, because, well, after all, this is a Cadillac, a vehicle I grew up around and pretty much understood the presence when those vehicles show up. Now, from the profile, this is where a vehicle certainly should stand out, and dare I say the XT4, other than the color, does that? Well, in this segment, it kind of blends in just a little bit. Now, what you're going to see is body color all the way around. Instead of dressing this vehicle up like you might see in a typical old school Caddy, well, this is subdued with a little bit more glossy accent in the black appointment. Even down low, we'll see some up there in the grille warfare. But when it comes to the profile, could you argue you've seen this design maybe across the competition or even in the family lineup over at General Motors? Certainly. Now, what I like is it's pretty much straightforward styling. Now, could you say this is where you see more of the SUV style? Certainly, because crossovers are starting to, well, chisel their way into imperfections and, well, sculpting things too much. But here for the XT4, I do like that it's pretty much a straightforward design. Now, as you sweep down, again, nice overall styling, really dynamic here at the back end. I'll show you that. And that's really what sets off this vehicle, is both the grille warfare and back end prowess. Before we get to the back end prowess, let's talk a little bit about ingress and the fact that, of course, this XT4 comes with smart key system. And what I like on the Cadillac is really the nice simplicity when it comes to the fob. Just a modest weight to it, but nice and slim. Does have some great operation. Lock, unlock, of course, remote start, and double click for the operation of the rear hatch. Now, at every entry point, at every door, you do have quick access in the form of a button. Pretty much that means you can go up to any door, press it one time, unlocks with ease. As you walk away, lock it right up. But the one Achilles heel that we find in a lot of vehicles is right here at the Phillip area. Pretty much always unlocked all the time. And what I expect on a Cad like this is for this area to be secure. But unfortunately, on this particular model, it is not. But it is a capless system, which does make for one less operation when you do get to the Phillip area. Grille warfare certainly takes top billing, but back end prowess may be a close second. And just like the front with the headlight assembly, the taillights really set the tone. You see in this nice vertical overall look, the traditional horizontal pattern, barely even noticeable, all under a nice clear lens, nice and stylized. Now body color sweeps all the way around this vehicle. The two-tone that we see in the lower fascia, again, sweeps back here. Now when it comes to the roof line, that's going to be elongated just a hair with this built-in rear spoiler, again giving this kind of S curve like we see across the industry. Now when it comes to safety, you do have backup camera, backup sensors, and one thing to note about the overall sensors is they are ultra sensitive, really give you radar-like feel that the driver can kind of pinpoint where the touchy, well, scratch zones could be. Now another thing to note is, again, you do have the access with the button here, certainly the electronic release, as well as the motion activated. But one thing to note about motion activated, I've mentioned 100 times, is they just are somewhat awkward. Now this one does give you kind of an illumination there on the ground that you see at night. That at least tells you where to swing your leg. But as always, I tend not to be able to find it. One thing I like to do is kind of do a design like some of the competition, where simply the vehicle knows you're here, and if you stand here for maybe 2 or 3 seconds, you'll hear an audible beep, and naturally the rear hatch comes up. Instead of doing the kind of a Lane from Seinfeld dance, which typically I do and nothing happens. Diving in a little bit deeper at the cargo area, one thing you'll notice is the outer niches, and those are helpful for the longer items, as I've said of late, really golf clubs. But again, golf clubs really going to be a tight squeeze this way, going to go with the old diagonal approach. Now what you're going to see right here is around about 22 cubic feet of space, more than doubles to around about 48 with all the seating laid flat. Now it does have this nice tonneau cover that does rise to the occasion when the hatch goes up, but kind of this breakaway sense, still again mostly covered. Now if you do need to have bigger items get in place, you will have to remove this. It's in a slide, simply pull it forward and you can kind of tuck it away. Now beneath here you will find a nice spare tire. Again, that's something that's really fallen by the wayside. A lot of run flats out there. Not a traditionalist when it comes to full-size spares or spare tires, but thankfully the XT4 does come with it, and some little niches there for some storage areas. Now I mentioned how this breaks away when the hatch opens, but if you want to, you can release it, and that does allow it to stay in place, and you can kind of simply tumble it forward or simply lay it flat. Does give you an open space. Now again, with the over articulation of this rear glass, that does compromise the overall cargo, because simply big square items are going to have to go a lot more further into the cabin. That's one benefit of SUVs or crossovers that do square it off back here. That helps with overall interior space. Now again, if you do need to remove this, simply slide it forward. There's a groove right here that allows it to sit in with ease. You do have some nice anchor points down here on the area. You can put one of those nets in, or just simply have some nice tile down. Before we sweep around to the good old grill warfare, let's talk about a couple of other points. First off, at the four corners, you got 245 45s wrapping a 20-inch wheel in this particular model. Now this is an all-wheel drive, and with that, I like the fact that we have this nice lower cladding. And one thing Cadillac did to kind of differentiate themselves from this particular styling is, instead of plain Jane when it comes to just a universal coloring, well, they dressed it up a little bit with this high glass black accent down low. Now it goes nicely again with the other polished black you're going to see all around this vehicle. Now when you sweep up to the grill warfare, this is where kind of the smaller sport utes are stepping up their styling, not just in grill warfare, but specifically headlight appointments. And you see it really, this waterfall effect, this bedazzling that sweeps all the way around, a signature element that Cadillac is going through. Now obviously you have the stylizing when it comes to headlight. That almost takes a subdued approach to all this bedazzling going on. Now as for the rest of the styling, you do have, of course, body color all the way around. Again, the dual tones when it comes to that lower third, again with the glossy accent down low. Now the headlight's certainly only part of the equation, because you do have this huge broad sweeping grille that is adorned in nice black glossy accents that again we see throughout this vehicle, and just a touch of chrome, but the most of the chrome really saved for the Cadillac emblem. Now when it comes to airflow, you do have the lower intake, the upper face grille, and the implied grills here on the side. Now, they're not operational, but do add a little bit of chiseling to the front end. Now safety is also paramount, and you will have parking sensors up front, parking sensors in the back as well. Now, as I mentioned, the XT4 did come in all-wheel drive, and with that came some decent ground clearance, around about 6.7 inches. That compared to some crossovers and other sport utes that may be a little higher, around about 8 inches, or some a little bit smaller. So certainly the XT4 is somewhere in the middle. Now, where you also see the XT4 in the middle is when it comes to power plant, a decent offering, a 2.0 liter turbocharged inline 4-cylinder. Now, it's going to deliver around about 237 horses and 258 foot-pounds of torque. When it comes to 0 to 60 numbers, well, who really cares, but over 7 seconds. But it still had modest boot, scoot, and boogie. Now, the engine is coupled to a 9-speed automatic transmission. One of the surprising benefits to the XT4 when it comes to overall size is leg room numbers. Now, what you're going to find up front is around about 40 inches, but surprisingly for backseat drivers, barely drops to around about 39. And for a vehicle this size, you'd automatically expect around about 35, 36 inches. But for backseat drivers, this really is tons of leg room. Now, when it comes to overall seating, you're going to find a standard bench and pretty much individualized attention for the outer occupants. You do have a nice center elbow support that does flip down, does have dual cup holders when you need it. Now, as for comfort, what you will find, no tri-zone system here on the XT4, but you do have vents positioned nicely behind the center console. Now, one thing to note, the airflow is dependent, of course, on the front occupants. So when this is subdued because, well, front passengers just don't need the airflow, well, it could heat up a little bit more than the front. Now, what you also find is heated seats here for back occupants when they need it. If the outside didn't scream Cadillac, well, the inside won't either, with the typical wood grain you expect replaced with carbon fiber, and the leather appointments, really a darkened accent on this particular model. Everything pretty much straightforward design. The only thing not straightforward, there front and center when it comes to the touchscreen system. Now, what's great about this is this really houses everything. No need for typical buttons down below, but what you will find is a central knob there between the occupants, shortcuts all the way around, giving to the central points you want, and of course typical knob when it comes to control, volume select as well. But really, if you want to interact with the screen, right there, really easy to use. You do have the home screen, which is split. You can zoom in, of course, to get a bigger look at what you're trying to do. One feature that does take a lot of area on the dash is the climate control, and you'll see that sweeping all the way across, and that's interesting because you can find that on the screen up above. And one thing I wish they would do is really replace all this on most vehicles and give one huge bank of glass touchscreen system that really integrates all these buttons. But anyway, utilizing the climate control, what you'll find is dual zones up front, really with the temperature settings here, fan speed in the middle, as well as the various mode selects and other selection over here on the right. Now, down below you will find heated and cooled seats for both front occupants, as well as other features like parking sensor and lane control here underneath. Low on the dash, you will find this hidden area. You can pretty much retract the cover and find a deep storage to put your phone, as well as connectivity in the form of a USB-C, USB, SD card reader, and traditional car power outlet. When you don't need that deep storage up front, you can retract the cover. It makes everything nice and slick. One area you can't cover is the dual cup holders up here, but they do house most drinks. Now, one thing to note, if you do carry your bigger water items or whatever, they don't fit in here. These are just too narrow. Now, there's some other feature buttons as well with the auto stop, auto start feature when it comes to the engine. Again, some General Motors vehicles are getting rid of this button, but the Cadillac still holds on to it. You do also have some various modes when it comes to driving, the all-wheel drive, the sport, and the tour mode, as well as turning off traction control. One thing to talk about when it comes to overall airflow, one thing I would prefer is, well, a little bit more attention when it comes to the vents. Now, you do have the one there on the far side and the ones in the upper middle, but one thing I noticed is they are fairly slim, obviously even more slim here on the right side, and I tend not to get the air pushed to me as quickly as I expected. Now, over here on the left side, you do have one position there to the outer window and one here for the driver, but what I would prefer is maybe those positioned in different spots, because even this one over here did have a hard time getting airflow to me, and I just didn't feel as cooled down as quickly as in some other vehicles. When it comes to shifting gears, non-traditional here, but instead just with this nice toggle, simply press the button on the side, pull it back once for drive, pull it back again for manual-like mode. If you need to go into reverse, you will be kind of an extended reverse. You have to push it up a little bit further to get in there. Now, one thing to note, you can press the parking button at slow speed. So even if you're going barely a trickle in the parking lot and you press this, the vehicle will tend to slam on brakes, so it doesn't hurt to come to a complete stop before pressing that button. The gauge cluster, nothing to write home about, just a standard analog tach and speedometer with a little of a digital readout there in the middle. But I do like the fact you have the digital read for speed up above, as well as the current speed in the area. Even better, it does give you alert for school zones. That's just something helpful to keep in check, especially this time of year. That comes up as a warning, so it helps you reduce your speed. On the steering wheel, you will have entertainment here on the right side. On the left side for your cruise control and phone select. Pretty straightforward and easy to use. Between the front occupants, you will find this narrow center console, very elongated, gives you plenty of elbow support. Now, once it pops open, you will find a nice upper tray and deep storage. Now, one thing to note, it is not lit, so it is fairly dark at night, but does have chargeability as well. One thing to note, it does have this kind of tray here. This is actually extended outside the center console. Even with the lid down, you can put your phone here, pull it out with ease. Now, one thing to note, this did not have the wireless charging, which would be perfect to put in this spot, but it did allow you to put your devices and charge them up. Now, it does for this edition of Road Warrior and a test drive behind the wheel of the 2019 Cadillac XT4 all-wheel drive. Again, a vehicle that Cadillac refers to as a small sport utility, but I certainly say it could cross over any individual from the sedan world to the sport ute because, well, it's just so easy to drive and any novice can get behind the wheel. That's not to say it's a scaled down vehicle, because it does come in fairly decent, give you great interior comfort, 4.5, not to mention cargo, and that's the best benefit for any small sport or, again, any crossovers, just the ability to transform pretty much people and their cargo and get them to where they need to be. Now, as always, thank you for watching this edition of Road Warrior. Keep both hands on the wheel and eyes straight ahead.